Easy.
All right, cool.
Well, I do want to start with a question around the the intellectual inquiry around why we are the way that we are. Um, it's about the hardest. Besides the sort of existential, it's all. I mean, I guess it is existential. Why is it the way that we are? How do we make the decisions the way that we do? We're all living through this really wacky time in the world. As strange as you know most of us alive today can remember.
Hmm.
So I guess the question is like, what drove you to write a book uh, about how we make decisions? Just like really broadly, what was your motivation?
Yeah, well, we didn't have the answers right away, so we started off with the questions really, and so we live in an information age. We have access to all this great information. If you have the internet, you have access to some 50,000 journal abstracts without even having to pay for them. You have all this great information, and yet it seems that a lot of the metrics of our health, and we see this particularly in the United States, are in decline. And what's going on here? Well, we have great information on how to be healthy and perform really well, and yet we may be not going in that direction or stalling out. Something is happening, and so we have to reconcile that difference. And so we started looking at all the ways that can play out in your life. So there's diet, there's exercise, there's sleep, social relations, and everything else, and started looking at some of the big picture stuff that's happening quite recently. And we came down to the idea that really you have to look at this issue from a social, medical. Oh, there he is.
Hey guys, sorry I had trouble signing in.
It's all good. Welcome to the party. We're just gonna keep rolling, and we're recording and boogieing, and so we'll have you jump in, and I'll give you guys a chance to introduce yourself in just a second. But yeah, please continue.
Okay, all right. So we're really looking at this disconnect between all this information that we have at our fingertips, and yet some of the issues that are plaguing us that seem to be, causing us to stall out or even go in, a negative direction with our health. And and really we came up to the idea that something is something that disconnect has to do with something that's internal to us. We're not adapting to the world around us. And so what is that lack of adaptation? Why aren't we able to use all this information at our fingertips? And part of that lack of adaptation comes down to what we come with, our evolutionary hardwiring that's built into us. We're animals, and we come with a long and very well-honed history of evolutionary progress, and yet now we are in this world of plenty where everything's at our fingertips, and we're having a difficult time managing that in an effective way. So then from there, we dug into all of the ways that can actually happen as well.
So the fact that even though we know or can access answers and solutions to our health problems, that we have we've got the hardware that we're running still tells us to run away from saber-toothed tigers and eat all the sugary fruits and have as much sex with as many different women as possible. I mean, that's obviously not fair, but that's kind of where this goes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let Louis talk about dopamine in a sec and how
Yeah.
that plays out in your brain. But yeah, we have all these amazing rewards that are built into us, reward drives that part of our hardwiring. And yeah, absolutely, we look for sugary foods and fatty foods and everything else. But in a time before, we might have searched all day for the sugar that might have come in a carrot, and thought it was an amazing day that we found a carrot with all that sugar in it. And now we have a large slushy with 30 teaspoons of sugar in it, and our kids have that. So, and we don't necessarily know how to manage that or slow down. So now we're seeing all of the health effects of that, and it's quite a challenge for us. And so that's what the book gets into is all the various ways that the modern world is affecting us in a potentially negative way, and then we offer some solutions potentially to get out of it.
Awesome. Louis, let's talk about dopamine. Is when it again, at the risk of sort of oversimplifying or jumping to chapter 6 or 7 or to a later explanation about what's driving this decision making. I mean, does it really boil down? Does it boil down to getting that dopamine hit?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, it gets far more complicated while at the same time getting far more clear for me. I watched you may have seen the recent documentary, The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and that really complements what we've been trying to say. Like Rob said, we're running on outdated software, but the people that have figured out our old software and are taking it to full advantage are the Facebooks of the world, the Instagrams, the TikToks, the people that have been able to sell us as a product to advertisers. And the way they figured that out is that one of the most powerful drives that we have as humans is social connection, to be accepted as part of the group. Because as Rob said, if we weren't accepted as part of a group, millions of years ago, we wouldn't survive individually. And so what's happened, and I couldn't understand why the U.S. is so divided, but now it makes crystal clear sense to me. This is all orchestrated. This has not happened by chance. And as an emergency physician, I've been struggling with, why am I seeing so many young people in emergency with a rise in mental illness? And, the ones that I see that have attempted suicide, the ones that have completed suicide, I don't see because they go to the medical examiner. But our youth, and Rob's described this well, they're the canary in the coal mine. And, our youth is really suffering right now. So any parent out there who has any kids or grandkids, you got to watch that documentary, The Social Dilemma, and then you got to read our book, and you've got to say, wait a second, we got to put the brakes on things here, because things literally are out of control. And I think what COVID did, this pandemic has really shown us the difference between the segments of society that have been able to create their own patches and survive, and those that have not been able to create their own, software fix or updates and survive. So these are, I would say, pretty troubling times, and we have to at least find the ability to have, what's described as an agreed, disagreement, so that we can move forward and bridge that conversation between, whether you call them the red or blues or the haves or the have-nots. But I'm even more concerned than before we wrote the book, when you actually start looking at how people are being manipulated for the advantage of financial gain. And unfortunately, that model's in play, and it's not going to change. A lot of people have made a lot of money on this model, and they're going to continue to do it at our expense.
Yeah. Well, you've come to the right place then, guys. Because this is something that I talk about repeatedly, and I bring up repeatedly, is to ask these questions and have these conversations, and not just go along with what we're told. I want to go back to one thing that you said about people creating their own software update. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Are you talking specifically about people coming up with unique coping mechanisms and strategies? Is that kind of what you meant?
Yeah, let me give you a good patch. So a lot of people are not very happy today, right? That's just the reality. And so they're looking for all sorts of things to make them happy. So a simple patch for happiness would be discovering that volunteering improves your happiness by 40%, right? So if you're not happy, you've tried all sorts of antidepressants and everything else, and you're still not happy, and you've tried to get more money and you're still not happy, and you've tried, getting bigger boobs, tighter bum, hair transplants, and Louis Vuitton and all the other things that you think were going to make you happy, and you're still not happy, well, listen to the doc, maybe try volunteering. And that unleashes something magical in you that'll actually make you feel happy. Or biophilia. Go walk in the woods, go amongst nature. That'll make you feel happy. Get a blast of sunshine on a regular basis. That'll make you feel happy. What about the concept of getting a good night's sleep? Doesn't cost you much. That'll make you happy. You see what I'm talking about? So Those are patches. Those are patches that easy for me to say, hard for a single mom in inner Chicago that's got 3 kids and 4 part-time jobs to make them, try and survive. So a little more difficult for her if she if she had the time to listen to this podcast, right?
Yeah.
So the people that are listening to your podcast have already figured out the patches because they're listening to your podcast. You know, the majority of the people that haven't are the same people that COVID is visiting and that Katrina visited when she came through town, or that heat waves visit when, you know, heat waves come through town. So, but you know what? As Rob and I have always said, after the plague came the Renaissance. So this is a good time for us to sort of buckle down and say, hey, wait a minute. Okay, this is about as bad as it gets. Let's really put our thinking caps on and come out of this feeling a lot more energized to make a difference at the end of the day. And it all goes down to one word: caring. Start caring for yourself and start caring for others. It's not more complicated than that.
There's so much there. I love that sort of optimistic view of this, right? Is that, you know, we're going through this hard time, and then there's a thing after that. Whatever that thing is, we know that we can bounce back. We've seen that we can bounce back as a civilization, as a global community, and create beautiful things and find new ways of expression and innovation. So I really anchor to that, and I invite everyone listening right now to also anchor to that, to understand that the paradigm that we're in now is not going to be here forever. It will shift, it will change, things will move into something else. It's inevitable. Change is the one thing that we can anticipate, and having that view that there's something else coming down the pike, I think is something really meaningful. You know, positive psychology has this acronym. It's hope, optimism, resiliency, and efficacy. It's like this acronym for like what do we do? We're all just sort of hanging on. What are some tools? And what it sounds like the book does is it actually provides us with some context and some tools for this really strange time that we're in. Let me ask this. You know, you talked about the patches, right? And you also talked about caring from a sort of evolutionary adaptation standpoint, thinking about how our brains developed in this way to care, right? When we're thinking back generations and generations and generations about how the hardware that we're running on, how does caring tie into that framework that allows our ancestors to continue to move forward and stay alive and keep the seed going forward? How does caring tie into that in this current day now?
Well, I'll talk about that one a bit. So we talk about caring. We're talking really about that, having that quality of empathy where you are selfishly looking out for other people, trying to help them out. But evolution also tells a different story as well, that because we're social creatures, there is a hardwired need for us to be accepted into groups. The worst thing that could happen to our ancestors would have been that they would have been kicked out of a social group and been ostracized. So we also have to try to up our social stock in the group, so to speak, that we have to try to constantly evaluate whether or not we're useful to the group or whether we're not useful to the group. So there's been great debates that have happened, in social science, whether humans are inherently good or whether humans are inherently evil. And this gets into a little bit of that as well, because is it caring, or is it more of a need for us to ensure that we're not going to be kicked out of the group as well? So I think what Louis is talking about is true blue caring. That's when you are really looking out for others. They're benefiting from your giving your time. But we also talk about the book about this other side of us as well, and that really plays out in the social media world. The social media is like our need for social value on steroids. And so we are constantly trying to do things on social media, improve our little avatars so that we get the likes from others that feed our brain in a positive way, but also make sure that we are feeling, that we're part of a group. And there's a problem with that, though, in terms of the happiness spectrum, because if you're at the top of the group, the top of the food chain, like being on the top rung of a ladder, well, that's a great place to be. You are a very high value to the group. But if you're anywhere else on that ladder, you are inherently somewhat dissatisfied because you're not at the top of the ladder as well. So we see that play out a lot in what we call in social science as social comparison theory. And that is a huge factor in social media. We're always comparing ourselves to others. And I think we all kind of feel that. You know, when you see someone else doing really well, if you're a great friend of that person, well, you're going to feel good for them. You know, if it's a family member, you're going to feel honestly good for them. But in other cases, we know this darn well that some people feel a little bit like, why isn't it me that's in that position? And so you feel, because of their post on social media, you feel perhaps a little bit less happy. You shouldn't. We have to, as Louis says, we have to develop patches to get around this new reality that we live in. But this is something that is a problem, that social media makes people, a little bit less happy. There's greater depression. There's loneliness. Louis will talk about loneliness and its effect on you physiologically. But that's a little bit different than the caring that Louis was talking about as well, and how that plays out. But this is something I just thought it was important to mention, because we do get into that social aspect and how important it is. And we also know that even studying some of the areas of the world where there was the highest or greatest longevity in lifespans, like in the blue zones, that these are the most studied populations in the world. They looked at diet, they looked at exercise, they looked at all sorts of things to figure out what's going on here. And a lot of it has to do with the way the social community comes together and the social cohesion there. And I think we all instinctively understand that at some level, that if friends and family have your back and you know that they're going to be there for you in tough times, you feel good about it. Like you feel somewhat comforted in this life. And if you feel like you're on your own and you don't have that support network, well, I think that's a little bit distressing, and it adds stress to your world as well, and that feeling of isolation. So that's it goes both ways. But these are the areas of the world where they live the longest, and that was one of the major contributing factors to that, was that strong social network that played into that.
Yeah. Well, I'm struck by this sort of dichotomy between, social media has this sort of facade of togetherness, community, online community support. You could type in, there's a group for everything. Fans of bearded dragon lizards. You could find a Facebook group for that, and find your people. And at the same time, you probably don't know your neighbors, and you may not be spending quality time with the people that are actually closest to you. And so there's this sort of facade around what social media is actually doing, and the really important relationships that actually feed your soul and make you feel good and make you feel loved, and you can see other people's faces without a mask over them. You make that sort of important connection. Which also ties into loneliness, right? It's like I'm seeing all of these people, and I'm on all parts of all of these different groups, and I've got 10,000 followers on Twitter, yet I'm so lonely. Like, Louis, can you speak to a little bit about that sort of that division between what the ambition of social media, what it should do, versus that reality that so many people feel so lonely?
Yeah, well, first of all, as Rob said, you've got to understand the full impact of loneliness. I mean, loneliness is worse for your health than smoking. So we know that smoking is bad for your health, but now we know that loneliness is even worse for your health. And that's why in the UK and United Kingdom, they have a minister of loneliness. We understand the importance of happiness. That's why the United Arab Emirates has, a minister of happiness. And so the thing is, you've got to work hard at making relationships work. And social media makes it too easy to, get into a relationship. A couple of clicks here, a couple of clicks there, and you're supposed to be friends. Well, that's not how friendships develop. Friendships are a commitment of time, effort, energy, and they're hard to do in the best of times. And as Rob said, if you create a persona of yourself that aren't, then sooner or later the reality hits that you're not who you're pretending to be. And that's where young people, in their most formative early stages, social acceptance is everything. And if they can't get it, life's not worth living. And if you take a look at the suicide rates and the self-harm rates, especially in young women, they're skyrocketing. They're skyrocketing through the roof. And if that isn't cause for us to start understanding the impact of loneliness, then, I don't know what more it's going to take for us as a society to say, well, wait a second, let's re-engage in the basics, and look at, the Rosetta effect and these blue zones around the world that have shown us that you don't have to have much, but you do have to have social connections. And the social connections that make all the difference is people that, and I hate to make it sound so simple, but people that actually care, first of all, for themselves. If you don't care for yourself, who the hell's going to care for you, right? So you got to care for yourself. You got to stop being a schmuck. And, I'm really concerned about schmucks moving forward because nobody's going to want to be with schmucks. They put out a negative vibe. And pretty soon we're going to have to, focus on how to help the schmucks of the world. But, nobody wants to be a schmuck and nobody wants to hang around a schmuck, yet schmucks need help as well,
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are a lot of schmucks out there. It's easier and easier to be a schmuck, especially if you're doing it honestly online and you don't have to face the social consequences of saying something totally shitty, from a blank avatar on YouTube or Twitter or something like that. That's like,
yeah. But you know what the thing is, it's easy to send out, but like you said, if you're a young person on the receiving end of it,
oh yeah,
imagine the impact that has. Like, I do a lot of media stuff, and so I get my share of stuff. And I'm pretty thick-skinned, but it still hurts me too, like being compared to a safety Nazi or, we know where you live and all this stuff. I mean, you pretend it doesn't hurt you, but I mean, it does hurt you.
Yeah. Well, you could get, reviews on this very podcast, I'll read 100 5 stars, and it's that one 2-star that's the one that really gets you and keeps you up at night. It's, and I there's some evolutionary explanation for that, right? It's probably the need to be accepted, right? It's the need to have that community, right, Rob?
Yeah, especially absolutely, it is. Yeah, it's absolutely, and Louis pointed out as well. I think it's really important that the youth, the adolescents, the emerging adults which are obviously probably the most heavy social media users are the ones that are most affected by the need for peer acceptance, and they also have much higher risk levels as well in this age. And there's maybe an evolutionary explanation for that as well. That perhaps we are evolved to leave our village and have high risk adventures to go find a mate in the next village over, which is a risky adventure to do. But when they actually looked at some of the brains of adolescents and emerging adults, and we have all this technology now to do this, all this imaging, it's all very fancy stuff to be able to do that, they found that it was actually that the parts of the brain that were oriented towards peer acceptance were the ones that were driving the decisions at the time. So you have all this need for peer acceptance, and then you lay social media on top of that, and now you have the perfect storm. And the perfect storm doesn't always bring out the best in us as well. So this, we are trying to, we have cases where young people are putting stuff online that it's totally without thought, like in terms of sexual things and political statements and everything else that in some cases they've actually have to go back and change their identity later on in life, because when a prospective employer Googles them, they see this stuff come up. So we don't necessarily make great choices around social media either. And the book isn't just on social media, but the idea that is one of the largest things that have changed in the last 10, 20 years is monumental, and that has a great effect on us as well. And as Louis mentioned, one of the things that the ironic part of social media is that we don't, the social aspect isn't always there. I mean, you're typing away, trying to connect with people, but it actually often goes in the opposite direction, where you are, becoming more depressed, more lonely, more isolated. Some of the research coming out of the college and university age folks suggests that the anxiety levels and the feeling of being overwhelmed in life are exceeding 50% of the student population now. And as Louis mentioned too, the rates of suicide, I mean, this is the sharp end of the problem, but the rates of suicide are unbelievable, including those who have attempted suicide and those who have suicidal ideation. They've thought about suicide. You're starting to get up into in some cases, I think in the book we said 13% of the entire student body every year thinks about suicide. Some of the new research, even this year, is now coming up with almost 20%, 20% of the student body seriously considers suicide every year. I mean, that's the sharp end. Think about the blunt end. How many students are walking around feeling lonely, feeling depressed, and yet having all these friends on social media that they connect with every single day. So there's a disconnect there as well. And the book really looks at, okay, what's going on behind the curtains on the stage here, what is happening, and a lot of it has to do with our evolutionary hardwiring and the fact that we were simply evolved for a different time. As Louis mentions, the software update that is needed is not there, and if we're evolved for a different time, we're evolved to hunt for things that were in scarcity, and now everything is right at our fingertips. So it's food, and whether it's food, sex, or what have you. It's social media, our devices in our hands. All of these things are feeding our brain, and it's becoming overloaded, and we are getting stuck in a fight or flight type response, and that also creates a lot of cortisol and stress in our bodies, and we're stuck in that state, and that's having a negative effect on our health, our actual health. So. As Louis was mentioning, you've got real health outcomes in terms of your heart and cancer and everything else that are affected by that. That's causing us real harm.
Sean, let me try and simplify it. So I really, I don't have stocks in the social dilemma, but I'm going to keep pushing it because they so clearly delineate that on the other side of the screen is artificial intelligence and billions of dollars in programs that are trying to make you feel like you have to spend more time on these devices so that they can sell more ad time. And so the more time you're spending on these devices, that's less time you have to stop and think about what's going on in the world. So you're coming with your primitive brain and you're interfacing, and on the other side is computing power that we've never seen before, and that every day is just becoming more powerful. And you're trying to then figure out, why is the world falling apart? I mean, why can't we focus on global warming? Why are all governments pretty well around the world going through this populist movement? And why are societies divided into two? And the reason is, it's not a coincidence. Somebody's making millions of dollars on this. And the trouble is, people are so busy, trying to make ends meet, that they don't have time to stop and figure out what's going on. And that's why, the book's just sold out in Canada, because people are reading it and resonating and saying, oh my gosh, this is worse than we actually thought it was.
Yeah. Do you, if there were a software update, as my little simple brain tries to think about what that might look like, is that software update, bear with me here, does that look like, transhumanist AI, is that Neuralink? Is a software update, elevated spiritual prowess, consciousness enhancement through psychedelics? Is it a sort of Rudolf Steiner, mystical way of connecting with the planet and touching in with nature to be able to get an upgrade that way, which would kind of, which is also kind of going more primal? I just sort of think about what that might look like, and you guys are the experts. What might that look like?
Well, I'll start off with that, and then Louis can finish up. But Louis talked about patches, and another way to think about that is our hacks. We talk about biohacks. We talk about biohacks in the book as well, and some of the links to those and where they came from, and some of the effects of those. But really, the idea that we get across in the book is, in terms of a software update, is first of all understanding and awareness. We can't really solve problems unless we understand where we are and what's going on. So, whether or not you're trying to lose weight or trying to exercise more, or whether you're trying to sleep more, or you're wondering why your social media is making you feel crappy, all of these things are playing out, and we have to understand why that is happening. So that's what we get into in the book, is first of all is the understanding and awareness of how your brain and body are working and why they're doing that and why you're doing the things you're doing. So that's the first kind of software update is really doing that. And then I think from there it is really just the idea that how do we manage all of the plenty that is around us. And we talk a little bit about the idea of resilience, and I know you mentioned the word resilience, and I think that has a lot of value. But we talk also a little bit about the limitations of resilience. So resilience is the idea that you can absorb something and bounce back from it, and you're okay from it. But a lot of people are trying to push against their hardwiring, and it's not making them feel any better. In fact, they feel depleted, exhausted, still high stress. And maybe they just go back to the negative habits that they had before, and it's a cycle that perpetuates. So how do you get out of that? Well, one of the things that we talk about in the book is the idea that willpower, that is essentially being able to resist something, is a finite resource, and it's like gas in your car. So you can use it up, and when you use it up, then you run out, and you fall back into the pattern again. So you have to figure out, how do I refill the willpower in my gas tank, so to speak. And one of the things is feeding that same hardwiring, but in a positive way. So that's that hardwiring that is looking for reward, whether that's sugar, fat, salt, sex, whatever it is, or social media on your phone. Whatever it is that's searching for that reward, feed it in a more positive way, and then that frees up your willpower. So there's a couple of great examples of that. One we use in the book is the famous cookie and radish experiment. So that's where a group of individuals, half of them got these amazing cookies that came right out of the oven, and half of them got radishes. And then they did this big math test, and the ones that had the radishes did a lot poorer on the test, and they didn't last as long. And the ones that had the cookies actually did better and lasted longer. So the conclusion that they drew from that, amongst other pieces of literature, was that by having the cookie, they rewarded their brain, replenishing some of that willpower to then help them sustain through the long and hard math experiment or math test. So giving ourselves these small tactical rewards, or strategic rewards, if you want to call it that, is really important. Athletes do this really well in high performance athletics. They have to sustain unbelievable levels of effort, whether they are competing or training, and then they give themselves this downtime where they can just feed their brains and bodies, and in other ways, obviously probably not very negative ways, but still, whether it's eating a favorite snack, watching a corny movie, doing a hobby like photography, or something else that is totally different, or hanging out with family. It's just feeding your body and your brain in a different positive way that replenishes that gas tank as well. So these are little things that we talk about. And then there's other stuff that, with respect to sleep and what time you wake up in the morning, especially your children, how to manage your children's screen time. All of these are little hacks or patches that we talk about as well. And I think it's a package deal for the software update, but all of these things come into play as well. We went through the book, we went through all the different areas that we felt were the biggest areas that people were affected by every single day. And so each chapter kind of looks at that as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I think the takeaway for me there and for people listening is, if you're everybody's day to day is screwy now, right? We're spending more time at home. We're spending more time with our partners and with our families, and we're having to ask these questions about do we like our homes? Do we like our families? Are we connected with them? We're confronted by the life that we've created for ourselves, and that in and of itself, that introspection can eat up a lot of brain power. That can use up a lot of your will and your ability day in and day out. I really do like the idea of giving yourself a small reward, as if you were a pro athlete. Are you giving yourself time to do something that nourishes you? That's something that's a little bit out of the norm. Are you making time for yourself? I did an episode recently with John Gray, the author of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And I said, hey, Sean, I'm here with my family 24/7, a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 9-week-old puppy, my beautiful wife, like 6 chickens. I'm losing it. What do I got to do? And he's like, you have to leave. He goes, you have to get out of the house. Like, you have to get out of the house to boost up your testosterone. You have to get out of the house to be able to have some time, some space. And so I really think that it's important, just to echo what you said, that we find little things, play the guitar, play the piano, write your journal, paint a picture, do little things that you don't normally do that can really nourish you going forward. With that, Louis, what's the software update for you?
Well, I think the thing that I'd like leaving listeners with some ideas as to what they can do, and one of the most important things we do is talk to each other. We're storytellers, and when we tell each other stories, 60% of our brain lights up, and I learned this when I was doing research on the dangers of cell phone use and driving. And it had nothing to do with hands held or hands free. It had everything to do with the conversation. We survived for millions of years by sharing information with each other. So people should use the power of storytelling. All I have to do to put people in a really good place right now is to turn up the heat a bit, have some quiet music, and start with a few words that start like, once upon a time. All I have to do is say once upon a time. And for a lot of us, if we had a good child upbringing with no adverse childhood events, that takes us to a happy place. And then I would tell a story. I'd say, there's baby boomers out there. And the good thing about baby boomers is they're about to die. And so the reality is they want to do something meaningful with their life. They want to leave a legacy. And so baby boomers have got time, experience, usually, a little bit of money and social connections. So I'd like to get baby boomers to start telling the story that we've been having today, and tell the story very simply, like 3 risk factors: smoking, inactivity, poor nutrition contribute to 4 major diseases: certain cancers, diabetes, cardiovascular illness, and respiratory illness like COPD or emphysema. And that accounts for 50% of the disease burden, 50. And if you take a look at the states, we know that 35% of all dollars spent in healthcare are totally wasted. And that's about $660 billion a year. So if we could take that money and direct it towards, for example, the 5% of the population that always makes up 65% of all healthcare spending, and get back to the basics, Maslow's hierarchy. When I see patients in emergency, the first thing I ask them is, you got a place to sleep tonight? And if they say no, I know that I'm not going to help them by admitting them into medical school as a student. I've got to get, food in their belly. I got to get them washed, get them some clothes, and then try and find out why they're homeless. And you only have to ask a couple of questions to see that what's missing in their lives are the social determinants of health. Access to education, being a wanted child, not having any early adverse childhood events. If you're a pregnant female, not being stressed out so that the stress on your pregnancy will actually change the genetic makeup of that fetus in you. And then, the housing and the social and the employment and the nutrition and the list goes on. That's what makes people healthy. And that's the patch that's really required. In the meantime, we have to start advocating for patches for people that don't even know there's a problem, right? I'm more concerned. I'm not, tell you the truth, I'm not too concerned about baby boomers that are retiring, trying to figure out what they're going to do with their life. I'm more concerned with the people that are in the trenches, barely surviving, and having to look over their shoulder to see if it's either COVID or some other social stress that's going to come and impact on them. And that's why all these changes we're seeing with Black Lives Matter, with the disenfranchised, rising up and raising their voices. These are times, as we said earlier, Sean, of great opportunity. But we need to have people telling the story. And I believe that baby boomers, if they coalesce, and even if they do it selfishly by volunteering so that they could start feeling better themselves, so be it. But at the end of the day, society would greatly benefit from a cohort that's never had it so good. I'm a baby boomer, and I'll be the first to admit, we've had a pretty good ride. But it's time that we re-engage and do what we did in the 60s, but on a grander scale, because we now have the skill sets to be able to do it. What did we do in the 60s? I mean, we basically walked on the street with a placard, and we were able to affect change. But with what we have right now, let's hijack social media to our advantage and really make a difference. And you know what? When you go to bed at night, you feel a lot better.
I love that. That's a new idea for me. I've not heard the rally cry for the boomer generation to find their voice again, find the purpose, find the mission again. I think that's really beautiful. I obviously, my folks are boomers and they have so much to share. And fortunately or unfortunately, the boomers had it so well. They raised, fiercely independent Gen X, Gen Y, and millennials, like sort of the oldest millennial, and me and my cohorts in my group, tend to feel like we have all the answers because we were so empowered by the boomer generation that was home and that was thoughtful and interesting. That's a new concept for me, and I really like that a lot. What other sorts of hardwired operational brain activities are happening in right now that are really working against us currently within this COVID global mess?
Well, I think that I won't speak too much about the hospitals. Let Louis do that because he's in the trenches in the hospital as an ER physician every single day. But one of the areas that we did look at in terms of the theme of performance, and it certainly does play out in COVID times as well, is we looked at comparing what happens in healthcare with some things that we've seen in other high performance industries like aviation, for example, and how some of these teams work. And one of the things that we saw in healthcare was a really unacceptable rate of preventable errors in hospitals. And we underscore that word preventable because these are the types of errors that could have been, stopped potentially, but weren't, and, led to someone's harm or worse, their death. So in the United States, there's some research that indicates that the rate of preventable errors in hospitals is so great that it could be looked at as the third leading cause of death in the United States, which is unbelievable. And per capita, Canada is even worse. We used the number, I think, was 23,000 preventable deaths per year in Canada. Research this year indicates that it could be now about 28,000 preventable deaths. So what is happening here? To answer your question and to wrap it up into performance, it really comes down to the social communication element with these teams in hospital environments, and that does have to do with our hardwiring. So that is part of our hardwiring that is affecting us, is that there is a social hierarchy within these teams that is inhibiting the types of decision making and leadership and psychological safety to be able to speak up. These types of sort of soft skills are actually causing a lot of deaths. And other high reliability organizations, which is a term we use in the safety world, such as aviation, have had to deal with this and figure out ways around this and create their own so-called patches for their hardwiring. And part of that is we've seen that with crew resource management, how they do that in aviation. But what they found was that about 70% of all close calls, incidents, accidents in aviation had to do with the social dynamics of the crew, not the technical side of things, the social. And that's the problem that we're seeing in healthcare as well, in that setting. And unfortunately, people are getting harmed because of it. And that does have to do with the hardwiring that we come with, all of that, gray area social dynamics that cause people to second guess themselves if they see something that might be going wrong. Just think about it. If you are in a group and you're not the most senior person like Louis is in the group, and you have to speak up because you think that something might be going wrong. Well, if you speak up and you're wrong about it, your social stock goes down in that group. And now the group kind of looks at you like, oh, well, next time you raise a concern, we're not really going to give you the same time of day that we just gave you now, because obviously you're wrong. Now, if you're low in the totem pole and you speak up and you're right, well, now your stock goes up. So we have this kind of really interesting social dynamic that plays out inside of groups as well. So that causes, it can either help or hinder. But you have to create an environment that recognizes that you come with this evolutionary hardwiring within a group, and then how do you deal with that? So the high reliability organizations have been able to figure out ways to create a more open communication, welcoming environment, so that the senior leader of the group receives all the information they have to make a better decision, and that's really the entire premise there. But that's another example of how our hardwiring plays into our world every single day. And it's big. About 25% of the people out there will either have or know somebody or will know somebody that experienced harm in a modern U.S. hospital. And it's not just the U.S., it's Canada, it's Europe as well. So, and that's incredible. 25% of the people walking through the door are potentially going to have harm. Yeah. So this is a big problem, and Louis, of course, as an ER physician, sees this every single day.
Yeah, and just to be clear, nobody goes to work wanting to harm anybody, right? But the reality is these are very complex systems with people that, because of three risk factors, the majority of them end up in healthcare facilities. And so the take-home message, and it's no coincidence that was our first chapter. I think it's entitled "The Most Dangerous Place on Earth," and that's to make people realize you really don't want to go to a healthcare facility unless you absolutely have to. So in other words, really take stock and try and be as healthy as you can. And okay, there are some pre-existing conditions that are hard to manage, but by and large, a lot of disease can be prevented in the first place. And what we're saying is, the reason it's difficult to prevent a lot of it is because you're wired to do things that at the end of the day, you're thinking you're doing them because it's going to make you healthy, but it actually makes you sick. And so that's the premise of the whole book is don't rely on the healthcare system to make you healthy. And as a matter of fact, the healthcare system is really only responsible for maybe 15 to 20% of your health. The rest of your health comes from the social determinants of health. And that's something we don't talk about enough because public health and preventative medicine are the poor cousins of the healthcare system. It's far sexier to, have a cure for a disease or to take a pill than it is to talk about prevention. So it's unfortunate, but that's the way society is set up, right?
Yeah. Well, I for one, am doing everything that I can, as you have already mentioned, with this podcast, with this platform, to promote biohacking and medical freedom, biological sovereignty, taking responsibility for your life and your lifestyle, doing little things, doing little teeny things that make a big, huge difference. I'm working right now with actually a Canadian Harvard trained physician to build a platform that will make health optimization more accessible using this really incredible AI platform. And because you think about it, right? And this kind of goes back to the patch idea. I've got 290 episodes that range from red light therapy to blue blocking glasses to the benefits of breath work. And any given person coming into this universe has a thing that they want to improve. They want to be more energetic, or they want to figure out their sleep, or they want to look healthier. But there's so much information out. I don't have 10 hours to go comb through 290 episodes of the Optimal Performance Podcast. I need it digestible. And so what I'm building now with my partner is a way to get to the shortest route possible to the ideas that will help that person affect their life in the most effective way that's most specific to them. Give them access and get discount codes to tools that will help them, like blue blocking glasses, or, I've got breath ionizers and, CBD vape pens and all sorts of, amazing technology that helps us before we get sick, before we have to go to the hospital where things can go sideways sometimes. So I really, really do appreciate it. It doesn't surprise me something about Canadians. You guys are a step ahead, and I wonder why that is. I wonder why. I mean, do you guys have any idea why the trend for taking your personal health responsibility, is it a sort of independent Canadian thing? Have you thought about that at all?
Well. Hey, Louis, why don't you answer this one? Because you were the president of the Canadian Medical Association, so maybe you got an answer for this.
Yeah, no, it's because we're fortunate to live next to the United States. Honestly. No, seriously.
What not to do?
How many countries on earth can, be neighbors with such a powerhouse? And, there's so much innovation and there's so much great stuff that comes out of the States. I mean, you got the better part of the continent. We get the frozen white north, and you guys have Miami and, Arizona and Texas. We got ripped off here. And so we have to survive because it's so freaking cold up here. Now, we've been doing a lot of podcasts in the States, and I lived for 2 years in Baltimore when I went to Johns Hopkins, and I'll tell you, there's so much good in the States, and so you're going through a little bump right now, but I expect that you're going to come out even stronger. And we've been great partners. We've been feeding off each other. I mean, you've stolen our Stanley Cup for so long that we're so envious of you guys. I don't think there's anything special about Canadians. I mean, we are blessed to be your neighbors to the north, and hopefully we can get some people on the podcast to say, this makes a lot of sense, and I think I'm going to get involved. And we'd love to hear from anybody and see if we can work together on this one.
Well, take that a little further. Like, what is the call to action besides buying the book and reading it and sharing it with friends? Like, what's another call to action? What's something that our listeners can do?
Well, I've always all my life surrounded myself with people that are smarter and better looking than I. That's why Rob's there, and all we have to do is just listen to a handful of them. And there's people out there that have different set of skills than we have. So maybe the next step is to do a documentary, right? So we take look at all the experience you have with all the different people you've spoken to. And so we do a documentary. We take these ideas, and then maybe Michael Moore, I've always liked his work, would like to do a documentary. So reach out to him and say, hey, listen, we got some crazy ideas, but we got to figure out a patch here pretty quick before our kids keep hurting themselves, and we got to give politicians a little bit of direction. The one thing I found out about politicians were they usually like to figure out which way the parade's going and get to the front of it. So let's start the parade and invite them to get to the front of it. And I think Biden and Harris are looking to do something quite spectacular. So I think there might be enough expertise in your listeners to sort of say, hey, yeah, these guys took the first step, but I've got a better idea on how to take this and move with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really think that, just to echo what Louis was saying, as we started writing this book, and we started looking at all the things that were, we feel that are maybe not working out as well as we thought with our current times, we really started to think that this is the story of our time. It really is this idea that there's this disconnect, this evolutionary mismatch between what we are in terms of our brains and bodies, and how we are having an inability to manage the fast-paced social world around us. our social world may well be the most determining factor of our health going forward. And it's only when you are now able to take that social lens, lay it, over top of the medical lens, the biological side, and look at them together, that you start to see, the picture come, into a bit more clarity with respect to our challenges. And we had the book reviewed, looked at by some, very esteemed colleagues in the medical world, psychiatry, and yeah, some of them said this is an amazing story. This is a human story for the 21st century. This is the new way to look at our health. And so we're proud of the book, that in terms of what it says. And I think Louis is absolutely right that there's enough content to really make a documentary, push the message out, because I think this is life-changing stuff in terms of understanding what is going on. That something that we feel is happening, but we don't necessarily understand it yet, and this is what it does.
Just remember, the last thing we need is more doctors, more nurses, and more hospitals. What we need to do is, like Denmark has done, and close down hospitals, close down long-term care facilities, and just allow people to start aging in place. And so if you create a culture that ages in place, it usually grows its own food. It usually has a smaller footprint. It usually has the ability of one neighbor to look after the other neighbor. And medical conditions are not viewed upon as, needing another pill or another surgery. They're viewed upon very differently. And there's a greater emphasis on end of life. I do a lot of end of life care. We've just built a $15 million palliative care freestanding facility. So end of life is near and dear to my heart. And we've got to start, honestly talking about managing people better as they're getting near the end of life. You only get to die once. So it's got to be, like my mom said, a really pleasant experience. And she died with a smile on her face and talking about it. Death is not something to be afraid of, but we're afraid to talk about it. But trust me, it's coming sooner or later.
Yeah, well, that's a really beautiful reminder, and you're right. It's not in the West, especially in the West. It's just not something that we talk about. We shy away from it. We deny it. And of course, I'm preaching to the choir. Louis, I know that you're. It's like, what does this guy know about it? But my mom has done her training in end of life care. And we just shy away. We shy away from the topic. We deny it. No, he's fine. No, he's fine. Prop him up. Breathe for him. Circulate his blood for him. Keep him. It's like, it's so not graceful, and it's denying this part of life, the other part of life that we're all going to go. And I really appreciate, that's really refreshing to hear the sort of reference to Denmark, because it's something that I'm aware of too, and the reference to understanding that it's going to come, and it doesn't have to be a medical procedure, to pass on to the other side.
No, I'm aiming to try and get people to die as healthy as possible. You just drop dead healthy. What's the best way to die than to drop dead healthy?
Yeah, I'm with you. Here. I want to live a long time. I want to burn hot. I want to make a difference. And then, in a week, I'm out. That's it.
No, I don't even want to last a week.
You want a week. You want to just, and that's it.
That's it. Louis is gone.
Cooking breakfast. There goes Louis, and he's done. Well, guys, this has really been a really cool conversation. This is, a really unique conversation for this podcast and for the content that me and the Mouse in My Pocket put out. So I really appreciate you guys coming on the podcast. Before I ask the last question, which is a fill in the blank question designed specifically to catch you off guard, fair warning. Please tell us where we can find the book, where we can learn more, and what people can do.
Where you can find the book, you can find it on virtually any major bookseller worldwide right now. So pick your favorite bookseller, either brick and mortar or online, and you should find the book there. And it's all through North America, Europe, Japan, everywhere. So that's where you can find the book. In terms of our social media links, mine is at drrobertbarrett.com, And Louis is drlou.ca. It's drlou.ca. And I'll let Louis finish up the your last bit of question there.
Okay. Oh, you're going to defer the fill in the blank to Louis. I see.
Yeah,
I see.
I was. Yeah.
That's nice. So this can be based on whatever it is that you know. It doesn't have to be specific to the book or to the research that went into it. Feel free to elaborate as much or as little as you like, but please fill in the blank. Everyone would benefit from knowing
that caring is the secret to life.
Beautiful.
And it's not more complicated than that. And it's hard to do, and you've got to do it honestly. And you've got to show some real passion. And the most important thing is you can't fake it, because people know when you're faking caring. People can barely remember anything about anything these days. So if they remember just one thing about this podcast, is that you're hardwired to do things that are bad for you, but you can counter that by caring.
Beautiful. Doctors, thank you so much for joining me today on the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
And scene. Thanks, fellas.
Yeah, sorry I was late there.